This is a Xeon CPU from 2007, literally a decade-old CPU. When this processor released, it retailed for a hefty $1,245 and was meant for servers, workstations, or other heavy work applications, and yet, you can find them online on 2018 for less than $20. So, should you? Is this possible? Is this even worth it? Some time ago, I released my first 2 trash talk videos, on which I started building my attempt at a gaming PC using mainly components that a very dedicated fan had salvaged from trash and donated to the channel. At the end of the second video I released, which I highly suggest you watch before this one, I had 8 GB DDR2 GTX 570 PC with a Core 2 Quad CPU. While that PC did fantastic on a lot of modern games, the CPU was obviously its weakest point, which caused the entire comment section to erupt in questions regarding using a Xeon. So let's explain something. In its original state, this CPU uses the server-oriented 771 socket, which is different from the 775 on common consumer motherboards from the time. Because of this, there's a fairly active community and marketplace for modding these chips so they work on the regular 775 socket. And that is when I move to the next part of this story. China! Because by using the power of the internet, I discovered that you can get these chips pre-modded for 775 sockets for less than 15 euros including shipping. What? There's like a ton of listings for these too. I have tried to do some research about this, and the best explanation I have is that there's an entire market in China for salvaging CPUs from decommissioned servers or workstations, then modifying the CPUs for consumer equipment and selling them online. Heck, from what I have read, every time a big company decommissions or upgrades a CPU farm, the price of a certain generation of Xeons drop. So, back at this little guy that I bought straight from AliExpress. This is a Xeon E5460. A 3.16 GHz quad-core CPU that is already pre-modded with a couple of extra holes and 2 inverted pins for the 775 socket. Before we can pop this one in our GA-P35DS4 motherboard, one final modification is required. You see, Xeons have a bit of a different microcode, that is the firmware of the CPU, than 775 CPUs, so a bit of modification is required to ensure system compatibility. I will leave the link to the guide I followed in the description, but essentially, since this motherboard uses the Award BIOS, it was a matter of downloading the latest driver, released in 2009, downloading the 775 and 771 microcode and modified it over the command prompt using a tool called cbrom195.exe. Once again, all of this is explained in detail in the link in the description. Then I had to install the BIOS using a tool called Add BIOS, because the tool included with the BIOS is not compatible with 64-bit Windows, and the motherboard itself is so old that it can only be updated directly from a floppy disk. Which is something I will kindly remind everyone that comments about how this is not obsolete or old hardware. Finally, this whole thing has a TDP, or thermal design point, of 120 watts, quite a bit over our Core 2 Quad, and it has a substantially lower operational temperature. So I hunted local use PC parts for the Cooler Master TX3, which costs about 8 euros. Since the previous CPU was about 13 euros, the cooler was virtually the only added expense, making the current referential price around 170 euros. But what do you actually get in terms of gaming? Games like Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which people keep asking over and over for some reason, are just crushed with no problems. Now, using the Intel Core 2 Quad, I was able to play Overwatch at around 45 FPS, but our Xeon goes above and beyond, delivering over 60 FPS through a standard match. This might become one of my new Overwatch PCs. From here, I wanted to try games that had too high CPU requirements for the Intel Core 2 Quad, like PlayerUnknown's Battleground. This game's rise in popularity and infamy as an unoptimized benchmark makes it the perfect place to start. But after the lag that always seems to happen on the first jump in the game, running on full 1080 and on the lowest settings seems to settle for around 40 FPS with both the CPU and GPU working very hard. I have seen PCs with twice the budget doing more or less the same, so this is really good. Heck, I decided to play an entire match just to make sure there were no further performance problems and ended up playing the best match I have managed to do so far. While I'm not much into Destiny 2, it proves to be another interesting test. The game can be made to work on low-end GPUs, but usually requires a modern CPU to work. But the Xeon does just fine. I will be using the small tweaks from my Destiny 2 video, but at full 720 resolution, the game performs almost perfectly. If you push to some of the most intense sections, you will see it drop occasionally, but recover quickly, and in general maintain its playable state. But can it run Crysis? I'm getting tired of making that joke. Yes it can, and very well it seems. This is Crysis 3 on lowest settings, but full 1080. And it is pulling more than 60 FPS in most instances and keeping high FPS all around. Very impressive so far. Finally, the great and mighty Witcher 3 on 1080. This game hit a very hard CPU bottleneck on the Intel 2 Quad and will stutter constantly, but on the Xeon it does fine and the game stays close to 30 FPS. Funnily enough, Witcher 3 is another interesting way to measure GPU performance if you can meet the minimum CPU requirements, and at 1080, this is really good performance. Just cutting the resolution to 720 could already take you a long way towards a better experience. And of course, I did run the GTA 5 benchmarks on lowest settings to see how far we had gone, and in general, the Xeon crushed it. Just having more difficulty on the driving sections at the end, but in general doing really well. However, not all is perfect, and there are definite limits to this technique. The infamous Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a good example. This version of the Frostbite engine tends to have very strong CPU requirements, and on the trashed-up Xeon was a bit of a stuttery mess with full CPU usage, not really playable. This motherboard has overclocking capabilities, so there is a possibility we can get more in that front. Problem is, the CPU has a very conservative temperature limit that we are already hitting with a current cooling solution, so I'm going to need something significantly better. So I guess I will leave it at that. What cooler should I use? Let me know in comments. Or you can enjoy this as a written article in the Mod My website. And thank you if you are on the super cool Patreon people.